Hey there! Welcome back to our Internal Medicine Clerkship Faculty Development Series. This video addresses a particular challenge for many faculty: writing effective narrative evaluations. Faculty and residents know narrative evaluations as the comments that they write at the end of the student evaluation on OASIS. And a lot of faculty think that the narrative needs to include an overall gestalt of the student or to paint a pretty picture of the student's performance. But given that many attendings currently work with students for 2 weeks or even less, approaching narrative evaluations in this way becomes a daunting, frustrating, and generally impossible task. I don't think it was always like this. When faculty and students worked together for a month at a time, it was probably much easier to give an overview of student performance in the narrative evaluation. But that's no longer the case. And what this has led to is that narrative evaluations now vary widely in quality and in clarity. And this has led to inaccurate assessment of students and lots of frustrations for faculty. In this video, we'll take a close look at what current narrative evaluations look like and examine 3 major issues that currently limit their utility. Then we'll contrast these issues with a new framework for writing narrative evaluations that will meet the needs of the students in the current clinical learning environment and be a more achievable task for you, even when you work with a student for a short time. The first issue that we encounter is regarding the content of narrative evaluations. Faculty and residents are usually the most knowledgeable resource about a student's competence and clinical skills, yet narrative evaluations may omit skills and behavior altogether and instead focus on teamwork, attitudes, and professionalism. From an assessment standpoint, it's like painting a picture but leaving the most important part out. Take a look at these narrative evaluations below for a student that was really struggling on the clerkship and did not demonstrate competence in core domains by the end. Can you tell from these descriptions that they were failing? In order to lead to accurate assessment, narrative evaluations actually need to focus on describing observed behaviors and skills. Of course, this is contingent on meaningful observation, which is a fundamental expectation of your time with the student. Here's a framework to help you remember to include these key domains in your evaluation. It's a really simple mnemonic, but it's pretty effective in breaking down the larger, more abstract task of writing a narrative evaluation about your student into a structured framework of 4 more concrete tasks of describing their skills, teamwork, attitudes, and clinical reasoning. The second major issue that we encounter is the language that's included in narrative evaluations. Currently, these narratives include a lot of high inference language aimed at giving an overall gestalt of student performance. The problem with high inference language is that it relies on your perceptions of quality and judgments rather than describing behaviors that you observe. It can be pretty abstract, much more susceptible to bias, and challenging to generate an accurate picture of the student's skills and competencies. Here are some examples of high inference language that we commonly encounter in narrative evaluations. Take a look at this evaluation, which is very similar to hundreds of evaluations I've read in the past. This was written about one of the top students of the year last year. Yet, I've read similar evaluations on students that nearly failed the clerkship. This has led to missing students who really need extra coaching to get where they need to be, or not highlighting other students that excelled in all competencies. So, rather than trying to paint a picture of the student's performance, think of your job as actually journaling your observations using concrete, descriptive language. If you use this low inference language and reference a shared mental model like rhyme, it's much easier for clerkship directors to generate assessment that's credible, reproducible, and less biased, and to highlight students that are excelling and help support students who are in danger of failing. The good news is that it's actually much easier to generate concrete observations rather than overarching impressions after really short periods of working with students. But low inference language is not necessarily intuitive because we've been indirectly taught that we have to write an overall impression. If you need help generating low inference language using the rhyme framework, we have plenty of tools to help you. So let's practice these 2 goals. Let's try using the STAR mnemonic and low inference language to write narrative evaluations for 2 students, Robert and Chris. Let's say that during the 10 days you worked with Robert, he was learning how to develop early reporter skills. He was working on gathering an organized history and delivering oral presentations that were easy to follow and focused to the top diagnosis. His differential diagnoses were often very narrow, or he omitted it altogether. Your narrative evaluation can totally convey that information without sounding judgmental by just describing what he was doing and using some descriptive language that you can find in our oral presentation feedback tool and our evaluation tip sheet. The last issue is a lack of clarity around evaluators' score selections, meaning that sometimes evaluators either give a student the same rating for all SPAs on the assessment form, which leads to doubt that the skills were meaningfully observed, or they can score students lower or higher than average but don't explain their selections. So the goal in when selecting scores and writing your narrative is to select the score on each SPA around what you actually observe for that specific skill, not how the student did overall. Then you need to back up your selection with your observations of that skill and give examples if possible. I absolutely understand that when you're on service, you're tired and cognitively overloaded, and it's going to be really hard to remember the details and then to match up what you saw to the rhyme framework. I would suggest 2 practical solutions to achieve this goal. One is to either jot down or make audio recordings of what you observe your student do each day. This literally means taking 2 minutes to pick up your smartphone and dictate a note or text to yourself what you observed. When it comes time to write your narrative, review your patient list to trigger your memory, read or listen to your notes that you took, and then review the evaluation tip sheet that's located on the OASIS page to match up your observations to your selections. Then add a few of those specific observations or examples into your narrative. To summarize what we've talked about, we've given you a framework to write impactful narrative evaluations. And we hope that you use this framework to focus the content of your narrative evaluations on skills and behaviors, to adjust the language to include low inference, concrete descriptions of your student, and to improve the clarity of your SPA selections by selecting based on the skills observed and by backing up your selections with descriptions. We've heard of a few faculty concerns and misconceptions that might prevent you from implementing this framework. So in the last minute, while you enjoy a little bit more music, we're going to try to dispel myths and allay those concerns. Please don't hesitate to reach out to the Clerkship leadership team for questions.